Drift into the warm seas, floating gently towards a lush, emerald jewel, crowned by clouds and ringed by restless waves. This is Bali, a volcanic masterpiece sculpted by Earth's quiet tantrums. Imagine standing barefoot on black sands warmed by the sun, feeling volcanic grit between your toes, knowing the earth beneath you once surged upward in fiery rebellion. Beautiful, yes, but let's face it, if you had been here during those eruptions, you probably wouldn't survive this, would you? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know your location and what time it is wherever you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Bali's birth begins millions of years ago, deep beneath the crust of the earth, as tectonic plates collide with stubborn persistence. Underneath the waves, magma patiently gathers until it can no longer hold back, erupting and spilling into the ocean, building layer upon layer until an island breaches the water's surface. Over countless eruptions, Bali emerged, growing slowly into the paradise you dream of today. Though back then, paradise was probably more like dinosaur survival island than a yoga retreat. The Balinese people tell a different tale, one less fiery, but just as compelling. They whisper of gods shaping the land in divine acts of creation, their legends weaving magic into reality. There's even a quirky myth of the giant turtle Bedawang Nala supporting the island on its back, occasionally shaking to cause earthquakes. Think of it as Bali's original vibrating massage bed. Historians still argue whether these tales were born from actual ancient events or simply vivid imaginations trying to explain nature's mysteries. But one thing is certain, whether shaped by tectonic might or divine whimsy, Bali's foundations were set to create something uniquely captivating. So remember, next time you're lounging by an infinity pool sipping coconut water, you're literally relaxing atop millions of years of geological drama. Bali's lush jungles, endless rice paddies, and picturesque beaches hide explosive pasts that would put Hollywood blockbusters to shame. But don't worry, the island hasn't erupted violently for decades, so your vacation selfies should remain safe. For now. You shuffle through time now, your feet brushing ancient soils as you step into Bali's Bronze Age, a time when metal first whispered its promises across the island. Long before written records, the Balinese were already crafting intricate bronze tools, ceremonial drums, and weapons, marking the dawn of a complex culture. Picture villagers gathered under towering palm trees, the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal echoing into the humid air, each crafted object a blend of utility and reverence. Among the most stunning relics of this age are the famous bronze moon of Pajang, a giant kettle drum said to be the largest single-cast drum in the world. Legend says it fell from the sky. Yes, fallen moon, shattered light, all that poetic stuff. But archaeologists assure us it was human hands that shaped it, not cosmic mishaps. Historians still argue whether this drum served purely ceremonial purposes or if it had a more practical function, like signaling important events or, dare I say, calling villagers to the prehistoric version of a block party. Daily life in Bronze Age Bali was anything but primitive. The people were skilled farmers, managing water for their rice fields with surprising sophistication. Early irrigation systems hint at a social structure organized enough to coordinate large-scale agricultural efforts. You can almost hear the gossip among the farmers, who's hoarding water, whose rice plants are looking particularly lush this season. Let's be honest, human nature hasn't changed that much. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient burial sites where the dead were adorned with bronze jewelry, their remains curled like they were resting in the womb. Some believe these fetal positions symbolized rebirth, a return to the earth, suggesting even ancient Balinese thought of life as a circular dance, birth, death, and back again. So, next time you pass a glimmering souvenir shop or see a shiny bronze statue in a temple, remember, Bali's love affair with metal artistry runs deeper than modern craftsmanship. It's a connection stretching back thousands of years, when bronze was not just a material, but a marker of power, beauty, and belief. You wander forward through centuries, feeling the air shift as sails appear on the horizon. Traders from India, gliding gracefully over the sea, bringing not just spices and goods, but entire gods and philosophies to Bali's shores. You can almost smell the incense, hear the rhythmic Sanskrit chants mingling with local Balinese melodies, as Hinduism slowly unfurls its vibrant tapestry across the island. This wasn't an overnight conversion, mind you. Balinese culture absorbed Hinduism with a kind of elegant stubbornness, weaving it into existing animist traditions. You'd see local priests standing beside Brahmin scholars, their rituals blending, their gods sharing altars. Historians still argue whether this cultural fusion was driven more by spiritual conviction or by political alliances, because let's face it, even back then, religion and politics were the ultimate power couple. A mainstream fact you'll appreciate. By the 11th century, Bali's royal courts were already flourishing under Hindu influence, commissioning temple complexes like Goa Gaja, the famous elephant cave with its demonic carvings and mysterious meditation chambers. Step inside today, and you can almost feel the cool stone walls whispering secrets from 1,000 years ago. But here's the quirky part. Bali didn't just import the big-name deities like Vishnu and Shiva, it also developed unique local versions and hybrids. For example, Rangda, the fearsome demon queen in Balinese mythology, doesn't exactly pop up in standard Hindu texts. She's a homegrown embodiment of chaos and evil, battling Barong, the lion-like spirit of good, in dances that locals still perform today. Imagine the original good versus evil drama, but with dazzling costumes, gamelan music, and, if you're lucky, a faint whiff of burning incense wafting from a nearby temple. And while you admire Bali's Hindu temples today, don't forget that their distinctive architecture, with its multi-tiered miru towers, elaborate stone gates, and guardian statues, represents centuries of blending Indian religious motifs with local Balinese artistry. It's a living, breathing testament to the island's knack for turning outside influence into something uniquely its own. So, next time you watch a bearing dance performance or step barefoot into a Balinese temple courtyard, remember you're part of a story that began with ships on the horizon and gods hitching a ride on the trade winds. You tread deeper into the medieval heart of Bali, where the mighty Majapahit Empire of Java casts its long, shimmering shadow. Picture it, the 14th century, Bali basking under the cultural glow of one of Southeast Asia's most influential empires. It wasn't just about conquest, it was about elegance, art, and political choreography that turned Bali into a prized jewel in Majapahit's crown. The mainstream fact here, the Majapahit Empire, based in East Java, dominated the Indonesian archipelago at its peak, and Bali became a key outpost of its power. Majapahit nobles, artists, and priests didn't just bring their banners, they brought literature, dance, intricate rituals, and a refined court culture that seeped into Balinese life like dye into fabric. One delightful tidbit, Majapahit nobles supposedly gifted Bali with new crops, like tropical fruits and rice varieties, enriching the island's agricultural bounty. Imagine your breakfast banana or fragrant white rice, tracing its roots back to an imperial diplomatic gesture centuries ago. Suddenly, your smoothie bowl seems a lot more historic, doesn't it? As you linger in this era, you sense how Bali absorbed the best of Majapahit's grandeur without losing its own spirit. Even today, echoes of this golden age ripple through Bali's temples, dances, and ceremonies. And when you pass through intricately carved stone gateways or see a temple festival in full swing, you're brushing against the same cultural currents that flowed here centuries ago, majestic, adaptable, and gloriously alive. You wander now through a Bali, alive with its own kingdoms, where royal courts glimmer like scattered jewels across the island. By the 16th century, Bali was no longer just a shadow under Java's empire. It was a constellation of local dynasties, each fiercely proud, each with its own palace, priests, and politics. You stroll through bustling palace grounds where kings, queens, and princes hold court, their ornate headdresses catching the tropical sun as dancers twirl and artisans carve delicate offerings from palm leaves. The mainstream fact. Bali was divided into 9 major kingdoms, including Gelgel, Klungkung, and Karangasem, each controlling its own slice of paradise. These weren't static domains, though. Alliances shifted, rivalries simmered, and now and then, one king might get ambitious and try to unite them all, usually with mixed success. Historians still argue whether these kingdoms were genuinely unified under a central ruler at any point, or whether the idea of a unified Bali is just a romantic gloss layered on by later storytellers. In reality, political unity was rare, and local rulers fiercely guarded their autonomy. You can imagine the island as a chessboard, each square ruled by a crafty king or queen, watching every move with suspicion and just a touch of flair. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Balinese royal courts weren't just centers of political power, they were cultural incubators. One particularly delightful tradition, the Lontar manuscripts, palm leaf texts inscribed with poetry, law codes, and religious teachings. Imagine a scribe, seated cross-legged under a frangipani tree, carefully etching delicate letters onto thin strips of dried palm, the scent of flowers and ink drifting on the breeze. These manuscripts were tied into bundles and kept in palace libraries, their wisdom waiting quietly across generations. And while courtly life sounds glamorous, you'd also find plenty of drama, royal marriages cementing alliances, jealous rivals plotting over cups of palm wine, dancers whispering rumors behind decorative fans. Even today, Bali's royal families still hold ceremonial roles, and many of the grand palaces, like the water palace at Tirtaganga, stand as serene reminders of a time when Bali's kingdoms danced their intricate political waltz under the tropical sun. You slip now into a turning point, where the winds from across the archipelago carry more than just spices. They carry the sounds of new prayers. By the 15th and 16th centuries, Islam sweeps through Java, reshaping kingdoms and cultures. You stand on a Bali shore, feeling the tension. Across the water, once familiar Majapahit rulers crumble, their courts dissolving under waves of Islamic influence. Where do the fleeing Hindu nobles, artists, and priests go? Many sail east, to Bali. The mainstream fact? As Java embraced Islam, Bali became a safe harbor for the remnants of Hindu-Javanese civilization. Refugees from Majapahit brought not only sacred texts and art, but entire ways of life, infusing Bali with an intensified Hindu cultural identity, just as it risked being swept away elsewhere. Historians still argue whether this cultural influx was a peaceful migration or a desperate escape, marked by political refugees and last-ditch efforts to preserve an endangered worldview. Either way, Bali emerged as the last great bastion of Hinduism in the region, proudly defying the tide that reshaped its neighbors. Here's the quirky part. Along with sacred traditions, the newcomers also brought unexpected flavors, culinary ones. Think about the humble lawer, Bali's spicy mix of minced meat, grated coconut, and herbs. It's said that these dishes evolved during this fusion period, blending local and Javanese tastes into something uniquely Balinese. So next time you're sweating over a fiery plate of lawer, remember, you're tasting centuries of history. As you wander through Balinese temples and palaces today, you're seeing the layered result of this era, the towering Padmasana shrines dedicated to the supreme god Akintia, the elaborate temple ceremonies blending Javanese courtly rituals with local Balinese magic, and the vivid carvings telling ancient epics in stone. Bali didn't just survive the Islamic expansion. It transformed, strengthening its own cultural walls while keeping the doors open to what it could absorb. So, as you trace your fingers along the cool stone of an ancient temple, or watch a ceremony unfold under the flicker of oil lamps, you're standing inside the echo of a time when Bali, rather than fading away, defiantly bloomed. You ease now into a softer breeze, but don't let it fool you. Change is coming. It's the 16th and 17th centuries, and the Europeans have arrived, their ships bobbing on the horizon like hungry wooden beetles. First the Portuguese, then the Dutch, their eyes fixed not on Bali itself, but on the lucrative spice trade coursing through the surrounding islands. You stand on the beach, watching foreign sails appear, and wonder how long this delicate island can resist the world's expanding appetite. Here's the mainstream fact. For a surprisingly long time, Bali remained mostly untouched by direct European control. While the Dutch tightened their grip on the Moluccas, Java, and Sumatra, they found Bali's fractured kingdoms, rugged terrain, and strong local resistance a little inconvenient. Instead, they focused on trade, nibbling at the edges rather than launching full-blown conquest, at least for now. Historians still argue whether Bali's independence during this time was due to its diplomatic savvy or just the Dutch prioritizing more profitable regions. Either way, the Balinese rulers managed to keep the Europeans at bay, making carefully calculated alliances, sometimes playing European powers against one another, all while maintaining their internal squabbles and ceremonies. And here's your quirky nugget. The first Dutch visitors were utterly enchanted by Balinese cockfighting. Yes, of all things, the sight of locals gathering in village squares to watch roosters battle for glory became a symbol of Bali's exotic appeal. Some early European accounts focused less on political matters and more on the spectacle of bloodied feathers and frenzied crowds, describing it with a mix of fascination and horror. Imagine crossing oceans for spices and gold, only to write home about chickens. As you stroll through this chapter, you sense the delicate balance Bali maintained, welcoming foreign traders, sampling new goods and ideas, but firmly holding on to its own rhythms and power. The island remained a place of strong kings, elaborate temple rituals, and a culture proudly distinct, even as shadows from the west lengthened across the archipelago. But don't get too comfortable. History's waves are rising, and soon they'll break. You find yourself at the edge of a cliff now, looking down into one of Bali's most heartbreaking moments, the Puputan. It's the early 20th century, and the Dutch, after centuries of nibbling, are finally determined to bite. Their colonial appetite has turned to Bali, where local kingdoms still hold strong. But the Balinese, they're not going down quietly. Here's the mainstream fact. In 1906 and again in 1908, Balinese royal families, faced with overwhelming Dutch military forces, chose ritual mass suicide, Puputan, over surrender. Picture it. Hundreds of men, women, and children dressed in ceremonial finery, marching calmly out of their palaces, armed with daggers, walking directly into gunfire. It's a scene so surreal, even the Dutch officers reportedly stood frozen in shock. Historians still argue whether the Puputan was a planned political statement or an act of cultural defiance taken to its tragic extreme. Was it a refusal to live under foreign rule or a final, desperate gesture to preserve honor? Either way, it became one of the most defining, haunting moments in Balinese history, one that still echoes in the island's collective memory. Here's a quirky, almost unbelievable detail. Some Dutch soldiers, after witnessing the Puputan, tried to stop the slaughter, pleading with the Balinese to lay down their weapons. But the royal processions kept coming, wave after wave, their minds set on death over defeat. Imagine standing there, rifle in hand, facing a people who have already decided your victory is meaningless. As you walk through Denpasar today, or visit the Puputan monument with its bronze figures frozen mid-March, you're walking through a space heavy with the memory of defiance. The Dutch would go on to govern Bali, but they never quite broke its spirit. You can still feel it. The fierce pride, the determination to choose the terms of one's fate, even when history's guns are pointed straight at you. So, next time you pass a statue or hear the word Puputan, remember, it's not just a tragic moment, it's a testament to a culture that decided it would rather walk into the fire than let anyone else write its ending. You wander now into the quieter, uneasy calm that follows the storm. The Dutch, having taken Bali through blood and ritual defiance, settle in to govern, but not with the heavy fist you might expect. Instead, colonial Bali in the early 20th century becomes something of a carefully curated museum piece, with Dutch administrators treating the island less like a rebellious territory and more like a living postcard. Here's the mainstream fact. Under Dutch colonial rule, Bali was promoted internationally as an enchanted land, a place where ancient traditions and art flourished untouched by time. Tourists, artists, and anthropologists began to trickle in, drawn by glowing reports of Bali's graceful dancers, serene temples, and elaborate rituals. The Dutch worked to preserve what they saw as Bali's authentic culture, sometimes freezing it in place, like a butterfly pinned under glass. Historians still argue whether this preservation was protective or exploitative. Did the Dutch save Balinese culture from the forces of modernity, or did they reduce it to a staged performance for foreign eyes? After all, while temples and dances were lovingly maintained, Local political power was systematically dismantled, and rebellions, though quieter now, were swiftly crushed. Here's your quirky tidbit. One of the earliest Western influencers to promote Bali was the German painter Walter Spies, who settled on the island in the 1920s and threw lavish parties attended by Balinese artists and European adventurers alike. His vivid paintings and writings helped shape the Western image of Bali as a dreamy, sensual paradise. Though, amusingly, he once lamented that too many tourists were showing up, spoiling the view. Classic hipster complaint, right? As you stroll through this chapter, you feel the tension between preservation and stagnation. The Dutch admired Balinese art, yet they often misunderstood its deeper meanings. They photographed rituals they didn't comprehend, praised dances they saw as exotic entertainment, and ignored the underlying resilience of a culture quietly holding its ground. So, as you imagine colonial officers sipping coffee on cool verandas, watching a Ligong dance unfold under torchlight, remember, Bali's spirit was never just a performance. Beneath the surface, the island waited, patient and proud, for the next great shift on history's stage. You step now into a world gripped by global turmoil, the 1940s, and Bali, like so many places, feels the tremors of war. The Japanese occupation sweeps through the Indonesian archipelago during World War II, and for a brief but intense few years, Bali trades one colonial master for another. You walk through village paths under the cautious hush of military rule, feeling the tension simmering in the tropical air. The mainstream fact: Japan occupied Bali from 1942 to 1945, part of its rapid expansion across Southeast Asia. The Dutch were swept aside, and Japanese forces imposed strict control, turning the island's resources toward their war effort. Balinese men were conscripted as laborers, infrastructure was seized, and the cultural showcase carefully preserved by the Dutch gave way to military pragmatism. Historians still argue whether the Japanese occupation fueled Balinese nationalism or simply replaced one foreign oppressor with another. On one hand, Japanese anti-Western rhetoric encouraged Indonesian identity. On the other, the harsh realities of forced labor and wartime shortages left deep scars. You can imagine villagers weighing the shifting tides, wondering whether hope or hardship would come next. Here's your quirky tidbit. During the Japanese occupation, traditional Balinese performances, especially dance, were sometimes used by the Japanese for propaganda, staged for visiting dignitaries to showcase the beauty of the lands they now controlled. Imagine that, an imperial power using local culture as both decoration and distraction, all while the real struggles of war pressed heavily on the people. As you move through this shadowed chapter, you hear the murmurs of resistance. Underground networks formed, nationalist sentiments grew quietly, like roots beneath the soil. And when the Japanese finally surrendered in 1945, the stage was set, not for a return to Dutch control, but for something far more explosive: the Indonesian struggle for independence. So, as you watch the last Japanese planes vanish into the sky, remember, this wasn't just an occupied island. It was an island simmering with change, with a people ready to step into a future shaped not by foreign hands, but by their own. You now stand in the thick, humid dawn of a nation awakening. It's 1945, the war is over, and Indonesia declares its independence. But Bali's chapter in this national saga is anything but simple. You walk through villages where red and white Indonesian flags flutter from bamboo poles, their bright colors rippling with both hope and tension. The Dutch want their colony back. The Indonesians are determined to claim their future. The mainstream fact: Bali played an active role in Indonesia's independence struggle, with Balinese fighters joining the larger Indonesian nationalist movement. Though geographically small, the island pulsed with fierce revolutionary energy, its people stepping into a broader identity beyond their own shores. Imagine village youths, once dancers and farmers, now clutching makeshift weapons, trading temple offerings for battle cries. Historians still argue whether Bali's local elites fully supported the independence push, or whether they were wary of losing their own traditional authority under a new republican system. Some nobles saw opportunity, others saw threat. It was a time of shifting allegiances, whispered negotiations, and sudden bursts of violence. You can almost hear the debates echoing inside palace walls, where history and the future collided in urgent tones. Here's your quirky tidbit. Balinese fighters, known as Lascar, sometimes combined guerrilla tactics with spiritual beliefs, wearing magical charms called Puputan for protection. Some believed these charms could make them invulnerable to bullets, a potent, if not entirely reliable mix of faith and bravery. Picture a young fighter, heart pounding, clutching both his weapon and his charm, stepping into a clash that would shape his island's destiny. As you move through this era, you sense the complexity. Bali was not just swept along by Indonesia's rise, it wrestled with it, questioned it, and ultimately helped shape it. By the time the Dutch finally acknowledged Indonesian sovereignty in 1949, Bali stood proud, its people both weary and determined, ready to chart their place in a new republic. So, next time you see Indonesia's flag waving over a Balinese temple or hear the national anthem blend with local gamelan, remember, behind that harmony lies a story of struggle, sacrifice, and the fierce determination to belong. You step cautiously now into one of Bali's darkest, most whispered chapters, the events of 1965, when political violence swept across Indonesia like a sudden storm, leaving deep, raw scars. You walk along narrow village paths, sensing the hush in the air, the lingering tension that still, even today, clings to certain places and names. The mainstream fact. In the aftermath of an attempted coup in Jakarta, Indonesia erupted into brutal anti-communist purges. Bali, often romanticized as serene and peaceful, was not spared. In fact, it became one of the bloodiest theaters of violence. Estimates suggest tens of thousands were killed in Bali alone, as political tensions turned neighbor against neighbor, family against family. Historians still argue whether Bali's violence was fueled purely by national politics, or if local factors, long-standing rivalries, land disputes, simmering resentments, played an even bigger role. Was this a purely ideological purge, or did ancient village tensions ignite under the cover of political chaos? You can almost hear the whispers, the careful avoidance of certain names and events, the silences that speak louder than words. Here's your unsettling but quirky tidbit. Some reports claim that many Balinese who participated in the killings later joined temple purification rituals to cleanse themselves spiritually. Imagine the eerie contrast. By day, acts of brutal violence. By night, ceremonial rites to restore cosmic balance. It's a grim reminder of how deeply intertwined spirituality and daily life are on this island, even in its darkest hours. As you pass through this chapter, you feel the weight of memory pressing down. Bali's reputation as a tranquil paradise often glosses over this painful past, but the land remembers. Rice fields, temples, rivers, they've all seen too much. Even today, survivors and families tread carefully, some still afraid to speak too openly, others carrying quiet grief. So, next time you marvel at Bali's serene landscapes or attend a joyous festival, remember the layers beneath. Paradise is never simple. It carries its ghosts, its reckonings, its history that hums beneath the gamelan's bright notes. You feel the air shift now, lighter, filled with the salty scent of sea spray and the laughter of strangers. It's the late 1960s and 1970s, and Bali is awakening once again. This time, not through political fire, but through the gentle, chaotic flood of tourism. You walk along sandy paths where once only villagers trod, now watching as surfers, backpackers, and free-spirited hippies spill onto the beaches, drawn by rumors of an untouched paradise. The mainstream fact? Bali's tourism boom began to surge in the 1970s, transforming the island from a quiet agricultural society into one of the world's most sought-after travel destinations. Kuta, once a sleepy fishing village, turned into a bustling hub of surf culture, nightclubs, and cheap guest houses, attracting everyone from budget travelers to jet-setters. Historians still argue whether tourism has been a blessing or a curse for Bali. On one hand, it brought unprecedented economic opportunity, lifting many Balinese out of poverty. On the other, it introduced waves of cultural commodification, environmental strain, and social change. You can almost hear the debates echoing through the decades. Is Bali selling its soul, or simply adapting, as it always has? Here's your quirky tidbit. Some of the earliest tourists weren't just surfers or hippies. They were artists and anthropologists, enchanted by Bali's dance, music, and ritual life. In fact, the famous Legong and Kecak dances were often restaged or stylized to appeal to tourist audiences. Imagine sitting at a beachside bar sipping a drink while a centuries-old sacred performance is adapted for your entertainment. Cultural exchange or cultural distortion? Probably a bit of both. As you stroll through this era, you sense Bali's delicate balancing act. The island embraced its role as a global darling, but it never entirely surrendered its identity. Beneath the reggae beats, neon lights, and souvenir shops, the rhythms of temple life, agricultural rituals, and community ceremonies continued, sometimes hidden in plain sight. So, next time you post a dreamy Bali sunset or snap a selfie at a temple, remember, you're part of a wave that's been rolling in for decades, reshaping the island in ways both dazzling and delicate. You glide now into a Bali buzzing with new energy, not just from tourists and surfers, but from the Balinese themselves, who, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, began a passionate cultural renaissance. You stroll through village lanes where artisans carve wood with renewed pride, dancers rehearse ancient steps with young apprentices, and ceremonies bloom with color, incense, and song, all while smartphones capture every angle. The mainstream fact: even as mass tourism surged, Bali experienced a cultural revival aimed at preserving and celebrating its traditions. Schools for dance, gamelan music, and mask-making flourished. Temple festivals grew more elaborate, and local communities made conscious efforts to keep rituals alive, not just for outsiders, but for themselves. Historians still argue whether this cultural revival is truly organic or partly driven by tourism itself. After all, when tourists flock to see authentic Bali, there's an incentive to make sure authenticity stays beautifully staged. Are Balinese people performing for the world or for their own gods and ancestors? It's a slippery question, and perhaps, as some scholars suggest, the answer is both. But this chapter carries more than just pride, it carries pain too. On October 12, 2002, 2 bombs tore through Kuta's nightlife district, killing 202 people, mostly foreign tourists. You stand in the rubble of that memory, the sound of sirens replaced now by silence. The attack shocked the world, and Bali most of all, an island known for its peace, suddenly made a target. Here's your haunting yet hopeful tidbit. In the wake of that tragedy, Balinese communities responded not with anger but with ceremony. They held mass cremations, healing rituals, and prayers to restore balance. And when they rebuilt, they didn't just restore buildings, they restored spirit. The Bali Bombing Memorial now stands quietly in Kuta, a place of reflection, lit softly by candlelight and memory. So as you watch a dancer's hands flutter like petals or hear the hypnotic clang of a gamelan, remember, this isn't just a show, it's a heartbeat that has survived sorrow, reclaimed joy, and continues, delicately, defiantly, to dance. You arrive now in the present, standing on a Bali that's both timeless and transformed. A place where surfboards lean against 1,000-year-old temple walls, where digital nomads sip lattes under hand-woven bamboo roofs, where luxury resorts rise beside rice paddies carefully tended for generations. You look around, feeling the island's delicate balance as it teeters between preserving its soul and riding the wild wave of global attention. The mainstream fact? Today, Bali is one of the most visited destinations on the planet, drawing over 6 million international visitors a year before the COVID-19 pandemic temporarily dimmed its glow. Tourism fuels the island's economy, but it also places immense strain on natural resources, local infrastructure, and cultural integrity. Plastic waste, traffic congestion, water shortages. The flip side of paradise isn't always so pretty. Historians, economists, and environmentalists still argue whether Bali can sustainably handle its booming future. Will the island's environmental and cultural resources hold up under the pressure, or will unchecked development chip away at the magic that drew the world here in the first place? It's a question that keeps planners, activists, and everyday Balinese alike awake at night. Here's your quirky tidbit. Even as Bali hurtles forward, it remains fiercely attached to its spiritual roots. The Balinese calendar is packed with ceremonial days, many of which cause entire villages, or sometimes the whole island, to pause, shutting down businesses for prayer and ritual. Take Nyepi, the Balinese Day of Silence, when the entire island goes quiet for 24 hours. No flights, no cars, no lights. Even the internet slows to a hush. Imagine an international tourist hotspot willingly going dark once a year, not for marketing, but for deep spiritual renewal. As you stand at this crossroads, you sense that Bali's greatest challenge is not about resisting change, but about guiding it wisely. The island's beauty, its traditions, its people, they've survived volcanoes, invasions, colonization, and modernization. Now, they face a future where the stakes are global, but the choices remain intensely local. So, next time you book that dream trip to Bali, remember, you're stepping into a living story, one still being written, one that needs care, respect, and maybe, just maybe, a little less plastic. Where to begin your own journey? The journey fresh in your mind, the echoes of temple bells and ocean waves still humming behind your eyes, and maybe, just maybe, you're thinking it's time to feel Bali, not just through stories, but under your own feet. Here's the truth. The island's waiting for you. And if you're wondering where to start, where to go, what to see, how to plan, it's all there, waiting like a perfectly laid offering at visitbaliindonesia.com, link in description below. This isn't your average travel site. It's built like Bali itself, beautiful, layered, and genuinely welcoming. You'll find guides to hidden temples tucked into jungle hillsides, updates on vibrant ceremonies you won't want to miss, and even tips on how to be a respectful traveler in a place where every gesture carries meaning. Looking for the best surf beaches, the site's got you. Curious about spiritual retreats in Ubud, secret waterfalls in Munduk, or those otherworldly sunrise hikes up Mount Batur. It's all there, and it's thoughtfully written, not just for tourists, but for travelers, for seekers. And maybe that's you. Visit BaliIndonesia.com even dives into culture, history, local etiquette, and sacred traditions. So you're not just visiting a destination, you're stepping into a living, breathing culture with your eyes wide open. So when you wake tomorrow, when the world feels a little too sharp and fast, you'll know exactly where to go to keep this gentle story alive. Head to visitBaliIndonesia.com and let your next journey begin not with a plane ticket, but with a single click, a single spark of curiosity, a single whispered yes. Because Bali is real, and now it's waiting for you.